In my first year on News at 10, I reported on a highly unusual case that has stayed with me to this day.
ITN News at 10 with Trevor McDonald.
It began with several unexplained collapses on a children's ward in a small Lincolnshire hospital.
Staff at the Grantham and Kesteven General Hospital became concerned about the growing number of youngsters suffering cardiac and respiratory arrests.
For the first time in British history, a nurse was convicted of killing children in a hospital. Guilty of murdering 4 children. Guilty of 3 attempted murders. Guilty 6 times of causing grievous bodily harm with intent. 25 years on from her conviction, I'm still curious about the impact Beverley Allitt had on her surviving victims and how she was finally brought to justice. I've come to Grantham to meet the children who survived her attacks and the detective without whom she may never have been caught. Former Superintendent Stuart Clifton remembers the case from the beginning as if it were yesterday.
On the 30th of April of 1991, a detective sergeant at Grantham rang me to say that there had been an abnormal number of child deaths and collapses. I went to the hospital myself the next day and I met with the 2 hospital paediatricians and we talked through the collapses of a number of children that had occurred on the children's ward, Ward 4.
In 59 days, there had been 4 deaths and more than 20 collapses on the ward. One senior doctor suspected foul play, but the other felt there was no real cause for suspicion.
Dr. Nanyakara felt that the collapses of children on that ward were just a blip on a graph and that there would be medical explanations.
I said, from my point of view, I don't have any suspicions. Yes, I know I'm very worried. I genuinely didn't have any suspicion.
An independent medical report confirmed some suspicions, but concluded that most of the children's collapses could be explained medically.
I looked at the report and had the feeling that it was basically shutting down the inquiry.
Detective Clifton faced resistance. Colleagues told him he would never get a conviction.
One very senior officer said to me, "You're chasing rainbows." Detectives develop a sixth sense, I think, and particularly experienced detectives, and there was something that just rankled with me that didn't seem quite true.
Stuart Clifton refused to give up his investigation. He suspected a killer was still on the ward. The children who had suffered played on his mind. Children like Bradley Gibson, now 33 years old. Hi, Brad.
Thanks, Trevor.
Thanks for coming back
No problem.
to Grantham. When were you last here?
I visited a couple of years ago, but before that would be on the dates.
Bradley was only 5 when a trip to Grantham Hospital changed his life.
I had a really bad cough, so my mum took me in.
Was that the first time you ever went into hospital?
Yeah.
Looking after Bradley was a popular young nurse, Beverley Allitt. At around 3 o'clock in the morning, Bradley complained that his drip was causing him pain. Nurse Allitt came to check on him, and while she was there, he suddenly slumped forward, stopped breathing, and his heart stopped. Your heart stopped?
Yeah. They had to use adult doses of shock for me.
So it was necessary to try to revive you, to resuscitate you?
For 32 minutes.
That's a long time.
It's a long time.
Dr. Porter applied electric shock. Not once, not twice, 7, 8 times, if not more. And eventually, He just managed to get the heartbeat going.
They were very close upon giving up.
Bradley can now reveal the extent of his injuries.
I lost the use of my legs, so I wasn't able to get out of bed, wasn't able to move around. I couldn't control my bladder for a number of years afterwards.
Do you think you suffered mentally?
I had nightmares. I remember waking up quite a number of nights just screaming.
Before the nightmares began, 22-year-old Beverley Allitt was a well-liked nurse on a close-knit children's ward.
We had a small unit with small team, so we knew each other. She was young, pleasant, very quiet, and I thought she was helpful.
Families of the patients adored her. During a chaotic 2 months, when their children were collapsing at an alarming rate, Nurse Beverley was always there to help. One couple unwittingly made her a godmother to a child she attacked. But Detective Clifton was convinced something sinister was happening on the ward. He feared there could be other attacks at any moment. So despite the tension it would cause, he pursued his investigation. Did it ever occur to you that you might be wrong?
It did, and it also occurred to me that if I was wrong, that there would be consequences, and I probably wouldn't be doing the job any longer.
But if Stuart Clifton's suspicions were correct, there was a murderer working on the ward who could strike again at any moment. According to the independent medical report, only one case offered any clue about what might be happening on Ward 4, baby Paul Crampton.
These are photographs of our children around the time. Quite old now, of course, but, you know, fond memories.
In late March of 1991, baby Paul became Beverley Allitt's fourth victim.
When he was 5 months old, Kath rang me at work. She'd been to the doctor. Paul had got a wheezy chest, and she said they're taking him into hospital.
I was on call for that weekend. I felt that he was reasonably stable, and I did tell the parents, if you want to, you can take him home. They said, Doctor, can we wait another day? I said, fair enough, if that's what you want.
That extra day in hospital would prove critical for Paul.
Early hours of the morning, I got a call. Paul had collapsed. Can you please come?
Paul was laid there. Beverley Allitt was certainly in the room. Paul was grey, clammy.
So I came dashing in. The crash team was already there. I checked some blood. I thought he very likely had a low sugar, what we call hypoglycemia.
Dr. Nani Akara gave the baby glucose, which suddenly brought him back to health.
Some time after, we were allowed into the treatment room, and Paul was sat there happily playing with his toes.
But every time he recovered, Paul collapsed again.
On the third occasion, he was rushed to Queen's Medical Centre in an ambulance with a blue light, and Nurse Beverley Allitt accompanied my wife, Kath, in the ambulance.
As soon as he was admitted to a new hospital, Paul was out of Beverley Allitt's control. He has since made a full recovery. But Paul Crampton's blood results held the key to what was happening on Ward 4.
We knew that blood had been taken on the third collapse, and the insulin level was quite high.
Detective Clifton called in the country's leading expert on insulin poisoning.
They'd got pretty good evidence that something was going wrong. but nothing that they could absolutely guarantee proved that any of the children that had been harmed had been deliberately harmed.
Professor Vincent Marks tested Paul's blood more thoroughly, and the results were extraordinary.
We were able to show that Paul had an astronomically high level of insulin in his blood. We immediately got in touch with Stuart Clifton and said, you have got a cast iron case. I can tell you that somebody was giving Paul insulin in big doses that he didn't need.
The police were now certain that there was a criminal at large on Ward 4. And they worked out that there was one nurse present at all of the attacks.
I decided that I would have Beverley Allitt arrested. In my naivety, I suppose, I thought that a young girl that's never been in trouble with the police before might just tell us what she's done. I couldn't have been more wrong.
No matter what you say, I'm sticking to my story. I did not do it. And that is the whole bloody truth. And it'll always be the truth.
Beverley Allitt's arrest was only the beginning. With no hard evidence, police needed a confession to prevent a killer from going back on the children's ward. In the spring of 1991, Nurse Beverley Allitt was arrested after a series of mysterious deaths and collapses at Grantham Hospital. Stuart, tell me about the first time you brought in Beverley Allitt for an interview.
Being an old-fashioned copper, I thought, 20-odd-year-old girl, never been in trouble with the police before, perhaps she'll tell us what it is that she's done. I couldn't have been more wrong.
I've come to meet the team Detective Clifton assembled to arrest and question Beverley Allitt. So you arrest a young nurse for murder. What did she say?
She was quite calm, quite confident for somebody who's just been arrested for murder.
It was unusual. If I had been arrested for attempted murder of a child, then I think myself and most people would have a different reaction. She was really laid back, chatty. You know, it was almost as if, come on, Bev, we're going to take you into town for a cup of coffee, really, rather than, you know, you've just been arrested on the attempted murder of some child.
As Beverley Allitt was taken in to be interviewed, Detective Michelle Billingsley sat next to her in the police van.
We took her into Grantham Police Station. We'd obviously got the press and that round there taking these photographs. She looks as if she's enjoying it, doesn't she? I mean, she has got a smile on her face and she's peering out. I don't. I'm looking quite perplexed about it all, I think, but she certainly looks more relaxed than what I look. She doesn't look worried at all, does she?
Without sufficient forensic evidence, there was pressure on detectives to get Allitt to talk.
This interview is being recorded. I am Policewoman 489 Billingsley, stationed at Grantham. My colleague is
Neil Jones, Detective Inspector.
What's your full name, please?
Beverley Allitt.
It's the first time in my career that I'd interviewed anybody that was under such suspicion. So I suppose there's a certain amount of anxiety that you get the interview right at the time. We'll have to tell you, Bev, that you don't have to say anything unless you wish to do so, but what you say may be given evidence. You understand all that?
The police knew that at least one victim, baby Paul Crampton, had been poisoned with insulin. They suspected Allitt was responsible, but lacked evidence tying her to the crime. They needed her to confess.
You were arrested this morning on suspicion of the attempt murder of Paul Crampton, who was a baby on the ward from about the 20th of March.
Those involved with the case have not heard these tapes for more than 25 years.
Do you remember that child being on the ward?
Yes, I do.
The officers began by asking Beverley Allitt about Paul Crampton.
We've got this kid for Paul Crampton. Some harm has been done to it, and you are the prime suspect at the moment. Everything points at you.
I know everything points at me, but what can I do to say I didn't? I've told you I didn't do it, and I wouldn't dream of doing it to anybody. God, why a patient if I hated somebody that much?
It soon became apparent that she wasn't going to admit to anything.
Officers tried to pin Allitt down on her precise movements around Paul's collapse.
And you say you went in there. Also in there was...
Dad, Mr. Crampton and Paul.
Paul's father, David, has never heard this interview before, and as Allitt did not give evidence in court, he's keen to hear her version of events.
Did you give that child anything?
Not a thing. I don't think I even went in the room. I'm really going to sneak back on the ward and say, oh, here, I'll have a bit of this.
I was always sure that she had a clear plan. These tapes bring that into real crystal clarity. Clear thinking, clear thought, clear plan, know where I want to get to.
No matter how much you don't believe me, and I know you don't, I don't care. I can't bloody lie to you. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you for days on end while I get questioned.
There was a certain confident attitude about her. I think she thought, which she did, that she knew more than we did, which put her in that better position, which she obviously enjoyed.
I'll tell you what, when I found out who bloody did it, having me in here was pissing time, fed up.
With no decisive evidence, Allitt's interviewers knew they could not hold her for long. And time was running out.
You haven't got evidence to say I injected him. What am I doing? Going round flipping, doing something to him all?
Probably.
Oh, what? You tell me what I could do. I am not bloody lying. I wouldn't do it.
Unless they made a breakthrough, police might have to release a suspected killer back to work on a children's ward.
But what am I
And
doing?
it's you, babe.
You tell me what I'm bloody doing to my children.
All I can say is that Paul Crampton suffered that because of insulin.
I know.
So we have to look at who's had the access to insulin.
No matter what you say, I'm sticking to my story. I did not do it.
The 22-year-old nurse would not break. In fact, she grew more defiant.
Is there anything you just want to clarify?
Yeah, I'll be here all year. You can keep me. Oh yeah.
Is there anything you want to say?
Ask me next year.
I'll clear around the time.
So, what did you think hearing those words again?
It brings it all back, actually. And you heard her. She sounded confident. She replied to us straight away. There was no hesitation. She knew exactly what she was doing.
But she was absolutely defiant in saying that she was not involved.
It just hammers home to me how devious she was.
With no confession and insufficient evidence to keep her in custody, Stuart Clifton was left with no choice but to set Beverley Allitt free.
I released her on bail because the Police and Criminal Evidence Act ties you to time limits.
He then found himself having to convince the hospital not to let her back on the ward.
If this was a killer, and I believed that at that stage it was, allowing somebody to go back into an environment where they could yet again kill was more than I could stomach.
Death at Grantham District Hospital have been investigated by police. A nurse is on extended leave.
Stuart Clifton appeared on News at 10, but couldn't say what he actually believed.
It's too early yet to say whether there is anything at all sinister in this case.
Detective Clifton had already found his murderer, but he could not tell even the victim's parents, like Bradley Gibson's mother, Judith.
We just all want some kind of decision making, and very quickly. None of us wants to go through this any longer.
I then set about investigating the collapses of the other children.
With Beverley Allitt now free, Stuart Clifton feared she could kill again. He began to widen his investigation to gather the evidence he needed to bring her back in.
I was a bit of a handful back then. A very naughty kid. Must have been a nightmare for my parents then.
Michael Davidson had his brother Mark at his bedside when he collapsed on Ward 4. They're both meeting me in Grantham, not far from the hospital where it all happened.
One of them things, after a while you kind of get used to the idea of going, back needing to go there at some point in my life.
Mark was with Michael while Beverley Allitt made up his routine antibiotic injection. As the doctor gave Michael the injection, no one knew that Beverley Allitt had tampered with the syringe. Allitt was there?
Yes.
And you remember that?
Yes. She was this side of the bed. I was at the opposite side of the bed. Within 3 minutes is when he started fitting. He started raising his body off the bed. And the crash team come in because he had literally died and brought him back to life.
Beverley Allitt attacked 13 children before police became involved. She was now back in the community, and detectives were no closer to bringing her to justice.
This young lady was callous, sadistic. She was attacking children after children, and yet she had no emotion whatsoever and no remorse.
Beverley Allitt was 22 years old when she killed 4 children at Grantham Hospital. She is now a patient herself, looked after by medical professionals here at Rampton Secure Hospital, where she turned 50 this month. But what was the lasting impact of her actions all those years ago, and how does it still affect her surviving victims? There's no longer a Ward 4 here at Grantham Hospital. The children's ward has been given a new look and a new name. But what remains is the memory of Beverley Allitt and what she did here. Kaylee was 15 months old in March 1991 when she collapsed twice at Grantham Hospital. 27 years later, Kaylee still feels the need to look nervously under her bed and around her room.
What are you looking for?
Nurse Allitt.
Why?
Till I see her and I'm in bed.
You see her when you're in bed?
Yeah.
I suppose the only way you can describe it is flashbacks of what happened. She sort of looks under a bed in drawers, looking for, actually, Nurse Allitt, although you're told time and time again, she is not there.
Kaylee was already suffering from a rare disorder that affected her development and growth when her nurse, Beverley Allitt, attacked her.
Kaylee was injected with air underneath her armpits that made her lungs collapse. She had what they call respiratory arrest.
How did you think this happened?
Well, we was just told it was the nurse that actually injected the air under her arm.
Your mum and dad say that you have a constant fear about various things. Can you tell me what you're afraid of?
What do you tell Mummy you're afraid of?
What frightens you now?
In case he comes back for me.
You think that the nurse might be coming back for you?
Yeah.
Yes, but that will never happen.
She wouldn't recognise you now, would she? You was just a little baby. And I tell you time and time again, don't I?
It's very difficult for her to understand, and you could tell her one day and then, a few days later or a couple of weeks later, the same questions are asked again.
Yeah.
No, don't cry.
Can you?
I'm sorry. Beverley Allitt nearly got away with these crimes. In the spring of 1991, she was the prime suspect, but with no hard evidence, police were forced to let her go. So a killer was back in the community, and the police were running out of options. They looked into her past for any clues that might help them build their case.
She grew up in a good, honest, hard-working family. She's, a nice local village girl.
At first, they found little of relevance to their inquiry. Beverley Allitt's home life in the village of Corby Glen was remarkably stable. Jeremy Marshall Roberts has long been a friend of her family, and he would leave Beverley looking after his young children.
She used to come and take Charlie and Jamie and the dog Cromwell for a walk in the afternoons. Charlie would be, walking in the hand, and Jamie would be in the pushchair. We certainly wouldn't have let her take our children out if we thought that anything untoward might happen.
When police dug deeper, a darker side emerged.
She had a really checkered history. She was a born liar. From being a child, she made things up.
I think the main thing was this attention-seeking thing.
There was a pattern of faked illnesses, arms wrapped in bandages, behaviour to seek attention and sympathy.
I think by creating this drama and being the person who's right at the middle of it, it made her realise how much control she could have over other people. And I think that became quite addictive for her.
And when she became a student nurse at this hospital, there were fires in the toilet, strange noises in the middle of the night. And I think this is an escalation. I mean, there had always been, and when you looked at a previous history, there had always been problems.
In 1 year, Allitt was off work for 100 days, claiming an array of illnesses. She also became violent with her boyfriend.
After she started working at the hospital, she started getting a little bit rough with me. And we used to have an argument, and she'd turn around and kick me in the balls. She grabbed hold of my hair and brought me to my knees.
Beverley Allitt's skill at deception had so far allowed her to keep one step ahead of the police. But the investigation was about to take a decisive turn. Police were closing in on the killer nurse.
I was in the city hospital. I bumped into a nurse, and she was responsible for collating blood samples. Now, children in hospital have two things taken off them regularly, nearly every day, a blood sample and an X-ray. So I spoke to her, and she said, well, I have to dispose of these about every 6 months, but I haven't really got round to it.
If Nottingham City Hospital had been sent blood samples from Allitt's victims, they might still be in storage.
Now, this fridge that I went to look at is bigger than this sofa, and we got into it upside down, pulled it all out, thousands of samples, and we recovered 9 samples of blood from the 13 children.
These were tested, and in some of the samples there was insulin found in some of these blood samples. There was potassium, I recall, being found in others, which obviously was then bringing, through the medical experts, the professors, other children into this inquiry.
The police now had proof of poisonous chemicals in the blood of Allitt's victims at the time of their collapse. So what was your next step?
My next step was interviewing Beverley Allitt yet again.
Would you like to give your full name, please?
Beverley Gale Allitt.
And your date of birth?
4th of the 10th, 1968.
Gone was the confident, combative Beverley Allitt. She now resorted to playing a very different game.
I've already been interviewed at great length by police in relation to various allegations made. I have been under great pressure because of the vast amount of media attention on me, and in this case I do not therefore wish to answer any more questions.
After presenting Allitt with compelling evidence of her guilt, officers looked for any sign of remorse.
If you're open for the parents of these children.
No reply.
It's quite sad, really, isn't it?
No reply.
Obviously, her solicitor was there, and she just made no comment throughout the whole of the interview.
Especially children, in particular to me, people like Claire Peck. 15-month-old girl. Smiles and winks at the staff.
Claire Peck. She came into the hospital with asthma. She was left with Beverley Allitt for a space of 2 minutes, no more. And she suffers the first of 2 collapses. Dr. Porter goes away to tell the parents of the little girl that she's on the road to recovery. Beverley Allitt's left with her, and within the space of 2 minutes, she stopped breathing and they can't resuscitate her.
Do you feel anything for those parents or the children themselves?
No reply.
Here is a little girl that ostensibly is on the road to recovery, and in the space of 2 minutes, she's killed her.
You shake your head and smile. Did you find this amusing?
No reply.
Horrific.
And you were absolutely certain that the first doctor had probably saved her from collapse, but that within a few minutes, Beverley Allitt had injected her.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But this time, police did have enough evidence to hold her.
And then she was charged. She was charged with 4 counts of murder.
Parents and relatives, it had been a long, painful wait.
And attempted murder, and offences of GBH.
I'm arresting you on suspicion of the attempted murder of this child on the 9th of April 1991. You do not have to say anything unless you wish to do so.
Beverley, I have to tell you that you do not have to say anything unless you wish to do so, but what you say may be given away.
I am now arresting you for the attempted murder of Kaylee Joanders.
She made no comment about the charges.
Can you recall that day?
No reply.
She was then taken to a cell and went to sleep, and had to be woken in the morning to go to court.
So she had to be woken to go to court?
Yeah. This young lady was callous, sadistic. She was attacking children after children. They were vulnerable, innocent, defenceless, and yet she had no emotion whatsoever and no remorse.
A nurse appeared in court at Grantham in Lincolnshire today, charged with the murder of 3 babies and an 11-year-old at the hospital where she worked.
The trial began on February the 15th, 1993.
Allitt is denying 4 murders and 11 attempted murders.
The true horror of her crimes came out in court. Evidence suggested that she suffocated some of her victims. 3 months later, a verdict was reached.
There was emotion in the public gallery as the verdicts were announced. There was an audible sigh of relief as the first of the guilty verdicts was announced.
Guilty of murdering 4 children. Guilty of 3 attempted murders. Guilty 6 times of causing grievous bodily harm with intent. For the first time in British history, a nurse had been found guilty of murdering children in a hospital.
You know, you put so much faith and trust in nurses. They're supposed to help you.
Do I feel betrayed by the nurse? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Something like that shouldn't happen.
Victims' families were determined to see Beverley Allitt sent to prison for life. And in late May of 1993, they finally got some news they wanted to hear.
Nurse Beverley Allitt begins a sentence without end tonight for murdering 4 children in her care and for injuring 9 others.
We're very pleased. 13 life sentences is what we hoped for, and that's exactly what we've got. I only hope that she's never released.
Parents of her victims looked on as the convicted serial killer was driven from court to begin her 13 life sentences at Holloway Prison. But she would remain there only for a week. Beverley Allitt has been here at Rampton Secure Hospital for the best part of 27 years. A patient, not just a prisoner. But should she have been moved here in the first place? Before her trial, Beverley Allitt reportedly told close friends that whatever happened, she would not go to prison. Beverley Allitt was not deemed to be seriously mentally ill when she committed her crimes, and on sentencing, she did not meet the criteria for transfer to a hospital. Once in prison, she refused to eat or drink and was diagnosed as having a psychopathic disorder. After only 1 week, she was moved to Rampton Hospital. Shortly after her arrival here, an ITV film crew gained extraordinary access to Rampton and managed to see Beverley Allitt in the hospital and to talk to her about what her life was like.
It's not too bad.
What's the good thing about it?
We're out, got more freedom in it.
You like it better than where you were before?
Yeah.
Why?
Because I've got more freedom. I'm not locked up all the time.
I think it's wrong. She should be in a prison for the crimes she committed.
She's a murderer. She's a child murderer. She's been living the life of Riley in there. She should be serving her life sentences in a prison, behind bars.
It can't be no fault I'm making.
I asked two leading criminal experts for their opinion on Allitt's mental state at the time of her arrest.
But what if it's a deliberate fault you're making?
What can I do deliberately to do it? I won't know what to do.
Jeremy Coyd has assessed some of Britain's most notorious killers, including Ian Brady and Peter Sutcliffe.
She doesn't sound like somebody who has a severe mental illness or a personality disorder so severe that she needs to go to Rampton.
You've got it out of allocation, but you've got it in paper.
Elizabeth Yardley has written extensively on healthcare serial killers.
When we start talking about mental ill health, we're looking at people who aren't in control of their actions. But it's very clear to me that Beverley Allitt knew exactly what she was doing. She knew it was wrong and she chose to do it anyway. I think somebody who has committed murder knowingly, willingly, I think, yes, they should be in prison.
Beverley Allitt was first moved from prison to hospital when she showed signs of anorexia while on remand. But our research has uncovered a psychiatric assessment of Beverley Allitt before trial, which judges her fit to plead and raises serious questions about the authenticity of the original symptoms that had her moved. We've had sight of an official report which suggests that Beverley Allitt was faking the anorexia, which had her moved from prison to hospital in the first place. Is this more evidence of her manipulative behavior?
I think this woman is an incredibly manipulative individual. She's somebody who has managed to pull the strings of other people for years and years before she was even convicted of these crimes. So why would she have changed her behaviour?
It is suggested that Beverley Allitt may have manipulated her way into a hospital as against a prison. Is it possible?
I think it's very difficult to simply manipulate your way into prison or into hospital. Otherwise, they'd be full of all sorts of people that shouldn't be there. It is not impossible that somebody changes their presentation to try and do what they think is best for them, but that's not an easy task, and you're going to have to do that consistently with a whole bunch of people who are trained to see whether or not you're accurately saying what you're saying and doing what you said you did.
Over the years, Allitt has been diagnosed with various personality disorders, but only she knows the answer to the biggest question still surrounding this case.
I don't know, I don't want to talk about it.
A quarter of a century on, one question in particular still troubles those involved.
I've always been puzzled why somebody who joins a caring profession would suddenly start and harm children. I've never understood it.
At her trial, experts presented a theory that Allitt suffered from Munchausen syndrome by proxy, that the attention-seeking behavior from her childhood had evolved into harming others so that she could be the one to save them. When she was interviewed, officers pressed her on this fireman's syndrome.
But aren't you proud of the fact that this has happened and you've saved them?
No. How can I save Miss Doctors, not me?
Had you not alerted the doctors, what potentially could have happened to these children?
They'd have been found dead, I should think.
So, whose feather in the cap is it? Who's the hero? In my layman's terms, I call it the fireman syndrome.
What's that?
I'm a fireman, I'll start a fire, I'll raise the alarm, I'll put it out, and I'm a hero.
There may well have been an element of a fireman syndrome, but there might be a much, much darker thing where she sits with the child in her arms, watching it die and getting off on the control of that. And actually, the act of killing is enormously exciting. It's enormously pleasurable. It will have had a very important purpose to her. The question is, has she told anybody why she did it?
Detective Stuart Clifton is one of the few people who has been able to ask her face to face. He saw her in hospital just months after her conviction. How was she then when you saw her at Rampton?
Very calm. She wouldn't give any explanation as to why she'd done it. She merely said, yes, I'm responsible, but I didn't do all 13, I only did 9.
She said that to you?
Yes.
How did she say this? What did she say to you?
She just blurted it out. I think there's no other way of putting it. Why have you done it? And her head goes down and she doesn't answer.
And has she made any other response since?
No.
Beverley Allitt's surviving victims are still troubled by her apparent failure to confess her crimes. But I've discovered a failed application by Allitt to become a lifetime patient and avoid prison. It contains a startling revelation. In this application, Allitt does finally admit to all 13 crimes of which she was convicted. Yet we have spoken to families of her victims, and it seems none of them was informed.
I didn't really know about that bit.
Were you never told?
No. It makes me feel better that she admitted to it, but it was more in her self-interest. It would mean more if she pleaded guilty at the trial.
We was never aware of
Never,
it.
no.
Never.
No. Too little, too late.
In making this film, I've discovered more about Beverley Allitt's character. When you saw her at Rampton, was there any sign at all that she was remorseful about what had happened?
None at all.
No matter how much you don't believe me, and I know you don't, I don't care.
She has shown no remorse for the lasting damage she caused.
Her crimes were very much like dropping a pebble into a pond. They spread far and wide. You know, there's clearly the families, close relatives of the children involved.
Upsetting, really, isn't it?
No,
You don't find it upsetting?
No, can't.
I have seen and heard how Beverley Allitt continued her controlling behavior after she committed her crimes. But why did she attack and murder those children on Ward 4? That is one secret I fear she will take to her grave.
You haven't got evidence to say I injected him.
No, we've just got...
Well then, if you haven't got evidence to say I did it, I didn't do it.